Howdy folks, welcome back to my YouTube channel, and today for you I have a tank mechanic simulator. So once again we're going to jump on in the grease pit here. I am actually working on some restoration here of a Stug 3, also known as Sturmgesalz 3, which loosely translates as assault gun. And I want to talk a little bit about the history and development of the Stug 3. The Stug 3 was the second most produced German armored combat vehicle of any type, following the SD KFZ 251 half-track. The vehicle was designed based on lessons learned from World War I. During the offensive on the Western Front, infantry lacked the means to effectively deal with fortifications such as bunkers. At the time, artillery was used to support infantry, but during World War I, artillery guns was heavy and hard to move, making it difficult for artillery to keep up with advancing infantry units. It was General Erich von Manstein that is considered the father of storm artillery, loosely translates as assault artillery. Von Manstein submitted a proposal for a vehicle that could provide direct fire support for infantry to General Ludwig Beck in 1935. Daimler-Benz would be tasked to create a design, and they would actually use the Panzer III for the basis of the chassis. Prototype manufacture, though, would be passed over to Alkit. The first 5 prototypes were produced in 1937 with a Panzer IIIB chassis. The prototype used a mild steel superstructure and a short-barreled Stuck 37 L24 cannon from Krupp. The vehicle from models of vehicles from Stug 3A to 3D mounted the short 7.5 centimeter L24 cannon. They used the same ammunition as the short-barreled Panzer IV cannons as well. The round used a large amount of high explosive and had a low velocity, allowing for a thinner casing to protect the high explosive from detonating when the round was fired. However, the rounds were very effective against soft-skin targets, such as light tanks, jeeps, half-tracks, other vehicles of the sort, and fortifications. However, the rounds were ineffective against vehicles like the T-34 and KV-1. These would be lessons quickly learned during the Russian offensives. In the spring of 1942, the first Stug would be armed with a 7.5 centimeter Stuck 40 L43, and the gun would later be upgraded once again in the autumn of 1942 to the 7.5 centimeter Stuck 40 L48. The new gun was also mounted on the Panzer IV as well. The gun was very effective against vehicles like the T-34 and the KV-1. However, the high explosive ammunition was less effective than with the low velocity gun. This mostly had to do with the fact that they had to make the casing a bit thicker for the muzzle pressure that the gun fired at. Production for the Stug 3G would begin in December of 1942. It was designed to mount an MG-34 on a gun shield for infantry protection. Some models of the Stug 3F-8 would be retrofitted with the gun shield as well. Some models of the Stug 3G would also later mount an MG-34 coaxially to the 7.5 main gun by the spring of 1944. And by the autumn of 1944, all Stug 3Gs would be produced with a gun shield as a standard feature. So at first it was an optional thing. The Stug was cheaper and cheaper and faster to build than the German tanks during the war. This was mostly due to the lack of turret. Obviously, you have the turret, which you have to have additional lenses, as well as a turret race. Turrets are also considerably a little bit bigger than actually a superstructure. Plus, there's actually hydraulics and stuff that you can skip out on because you don't have a turret. To compare its cost, it cost 82,500 Reichsmarks to produce a Stug 3G, but it cost 103,000 Reichsmarks for to produce a Panzer 3M. Now, the Panzer 3M is a late model Panzer, but they would have been in service with the same time as each other. Also, by this point, it was pretty well noted that the Panzer III's armor was not as effective as it was beginning of the war. The Stug 3 was very effective when used as a tank destroyer. Its small size made it easy to camouflage and hide the vehicle, and hard to hit when the enemy actually had to fire back at these vehicles. So they were actually very effective tank hunters, and everything I have seen in different types of reports, etc., makes this actually one of the most effective vehicles the German army had during the war. Now, of course, this had to do partially with this vehicle is actually a more defensive vehicle versus an actual tank. And by mid to late war, Germany was fighting a defensive war. That makes this vehicle a better option for them to use. Now, there are some notations, and I didn't dive into them. I just covered the World War II period of the Stug 3. But some Stug 3s would actually make their way into Saudi Arabia, and would actually, most of them by then would be out of service and pretty well useless, but some of them were actually used during the Six-Day War against Israel. Mostly they were used as pretty much immobile bunkers, and they were actually by that point not very effective for what kind of war they were fighting. But anyway, folks, I'm going to shut up for a little bit, let the video continue just a little bit longer here. It's actually almost wrapped up, and I will see you towards the end of the video. All right, folks, I'm actually going to wrap it up for the Stug 3. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for coming into my YouTube channel, checking out the video, seeing some more Tank Mechanic Simulator from me, and hopefully you found the history of the Stug 3 interesting. Um, I will also post some links on with the Stug 3 video here covering uh, showing my older video on the Panzer 3 as well as my two-part series on the Panzer 4. Since there's a little bit of relation in between the vehicles, I didn't really dive into a lot of the different aspects such as the transmission and the suspension and the engine because generally speaking it was the same stuff that you would find in the Panzer 3 because it's a Panzer 3 hull. What changes is the turret and the casemate and the actual armament itself. So anyway, folks, thank you once again for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Remember to hit the old like button. I do appreciate that. That lets me know people are enjoying these videos. But anyway, folks, thank you again and have yourself a wonderful week.